Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. As a man in the 21st century, one of the main aspects of utility that plant medicines and psychedelics have offered me in my journey is that of the all but missing rites of passage traditions that human beings have been a part of since the dawn of time. In ancient times, as well as the modern day in certain cultures, these rites of passage acted as milestones, especially for men, in which they would leave their boyhood behind in place of the newly achieved manhood resulting from taking place in these rites of passage, many which included and still include plant medicines to this day. What this offered is, among many other things, a sense of quote-unquote direction as to what life truly was, how to integrate into new chapters of one's life, and the celebration around the aging process and the wisdom that come along with it. Rather than the misery surrounding aging, much of the Western societies have fallen into the trap of believing. Sharing his time and wisdom with us on the podcast today is a man who is doing his part in reestablishing these rites of passage for men in the way of men's work, which he does in both one-on-one containers as well as group format, such as in his collaborative work with the masculine alchemy and embodiment group, Sacred Sons. And as someone who has been able to have massive shifts and move through painful challenges in his life through the medicinal, intentional interactions he has had with plant medicines. This episode is going to be a deep dive into a lot of juicy subjects surrounding men's work, what psychedelics can offer us when connected with intentionally, what his biggest lessons he has learned through plant medicines have been, and much, much more. Get ready to turn your heart to 11 and take the ride with us as I welcome my man, Nathan Kohlerman, onto the show. Nathan, great to have you back, bro. Long time no see.
What's up? Long time no see.
And for those that are just tuning into this episode, Nathan and I just rocked an episode on Highly Optimized, and I'm never sure which one I'm going to release first. Definitely make sure you tune into both. They were amazing, and they're going to be amazing because this one's yet to come. But I know it's going to be a pure heart flow, man. As we said in the first one, thirst traps and heart flows, you know, the most important things in life. And because psychedelics have been looked at as, you know, really demonized and looked at as challenging, let's just put a nicer term on it, in our modern day society, I always love checking with people about how they first became introduced to plant medicines, because some of those journeys are the most fun stories possible, right? Because you had to hop out of the confines that society tried to put us all in with a DARE program and things like that, which is a really awkward program when you really think back to it. It's like, hey, drugs are bad, but we have a lot of them and here, sniff them. It's like, what? This doesn't make any sense. But, you know, it's really interesting hearing how people broke out of those confines and first became interested and introduced to plant medicines. And so I'd love if you could bring us through kind of like when you first became aware of them. Were you okay with them or like in agreement with them when you first heard about them? Or did that come later in life? And all that jazz.
Absolutely. And my first experience, that was vigorous. Even collecting on it. I want to say it was March in 2019, I want to say. And, you know, I dabbled with MDMA and all that stuff younger years. And, you know, that was always my medicine of choice, I'll say, for a really long time, just because that's the only way I really had access to bliss, to peace, to happiness, to ecstasy. And, you know, fast forward to this time in 2019, actually, and I sat with DMT. And it was actually with a good friend of ours, a brother that we both know, and another brother, two other brothers, all Steelmates Flow brothers, I'll tell you that. And I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into, to be honest. And we had smoked DMT off a bowl of cannabis, which I'm not sure is the most desired means. I'll say now.
It is a method.
Because I took, yeah, it's maybe for first timers.
Yeah.
I may be projecting my own experience from this, but it was necessary. I'll say that. But I remember hitting it and going down, and immediately, like, I was within my own hell. Like, everything terrible that I could imagine was there. the lack of control, the excruciating pain that I had suppressed for so many years. And the reason why I share this is because it's important to prepare, right? To have the reverence for these medicines, because I had none then. I had no understanding. I had no respect. I had no idea or intention. And that's something that I had to learn the hard way, and that experience alone was enough to open my eyes for me to question, who am I? What is this reality we're living in? And how is this even possible? And it was through that experience, the integration was tough, right? I'm sure we'll get into more of the specifics on this, but the integration of that was how do I even view, right, this substance? How do I even interact or even question what these things are here to do? And that kind of led me down the road on wanting to learn more. Right? And I was curious. I said, well, if this is the experience that I had on this, then what's in store for me in these other areas? Because even though it was painful, it was necessary. It was necessary to see the amount of control and the grasp I had to suffering, right? And what happens when I don't trust, when I don't have faith, when I don't surrender to what is being offered to me in that moment. And throughout my experience and dabbling with mushrooms and LSD and going on this path of self-realization, right? Walking on this path of self-realization, has really developed that sense of respect, right? To look at it intentionally now and really ask, why am I using this? Right? What is this going to provide me? What am I asking? What questions am I asking of this medicine to bring me before I even sit with you? Right? What conversation needs to be had in order for us to sit in this space together effectively, right? Intentionally. Because if that's not there, then go down the rabbit hole of fear, which with any psychedelic and fear, they don't always mix very well.
Yeah.
But when they do, it's necessary.
Yes. Dude, a couple things there. I believe I've heard this story that you're mentioning. I actually know I've heard this story through that brother of ours. And I'm sure we can get into more of what actually transpired in that journey, because from my understanding, of course you can speak much better to it, but in my observation of the story and my hearing of the story, what was going on with you, or what was happening within you, was physical in a lot of ways, right? There was physical things that changed, right? And I won't, throw spoiler alerts or anything, but, I'm sure we can get into that. But specifically talking about cannabis and DMT, right? So I imagine it was NN DMT that you were interacting with, or was it 5-MeO or NN? Yeah, NN.
Yeah, NN DMT.
Yeah. The most terrifying experiences I've had on DMT have always been with NN. I'm not exactly sure why. And most of it, when I really think about it, is just that my head tightens up a lot, and I just don't seem to like that. But with 5-MeO, even though it's, in terms of like whiting out and becoming nothing, that is essentially what happens every time I do 5-MeO. With NN, I'm still conscious that I'm a human being, but yet things tighten up so much that it just makes me really uncomfortable. But, one of the things I've noticed between cannabis and DMT and that combination, because it's a pretty popular combination, I've had people, tell me they've done that before, and I'm like, oh, yikes, that's like a powerful combination, because essentially what cannabis does, and this is a lot of what I teach and connect with cannabis, is understanding what cannabis actually does in the human being, is it acts as a mirror, right? And so what it will do is it will show you exactly what energy you were going into that experience with that might be hidden through other means like the mind, the ego, whatever. Well, as those things rescind, right? And you're able to enter your body, you're going to feel what's in there. So anxiety, depression, excitement, euphoria, anything, right? So, if we're unaware of that ability of what cannabis does to come through, and then we're doing something like DMT on top of it, which is going to add in like a whole new revelation in terms of like, moving through, eons of lifetimes and geometrical patterns that make up the language of the universe. All different sorts of things. Then essentially what you're going to be doing is, really in summary, getting the exact mirror of how you're feeling and then sending that feeling to the stratosphere and expanding it times infinity. Right. And so, yeah, I definitely agree with you that that combination can be challenging for sure. And mostly it's just because of a lack of awareness, right? Like the first couple of times I did that combination, I thought I knew cannabis pretty well. I thought I understood DMT. I had watched, things on it and, but yet at the same time, the intention I set when I went in should have told me all I needed to know, because my intention was like, I want to be safe. Right. And it was like, well, why are you interacting with a plant medicine if safety is what you're looking for? Right. Because that is going to be the opposite of what's given to you. Right. Like, and even in another way, like I could look at it as like, it was exactly what was given to me, but it was showing me what was necessary to move through in order to find safety within, right? As we talked a little bit about in Highly Optimized. And so what I saw was actually like, I met all my demons head on, right? And so like, it was actually a paradox. I was like, well, I want safety. Well, what's standing in the way of safety? Oh, I'm going to see all my demons. And so, that intention is so important. And something I talk about with cannabis specifically, but it really, the same type of thread or, trend is let out into every medicine, is that if you go into it unintentionally, we'll talk with cannabis because that's something I know pretty well. And if you go into cannabis unintentionally, she will act as the pure feminine embodiment, right? That'll hold you and care for you and really like give you that comfort. And, what I always say is that cannabis is not addicting. But feelings of comfort certainly are addicting, especially if you're going through challenges in your life, especially if you feel stagnated, especially if you have trauma, right? Like those feelings of comfort can become very addicting. And so if you don't go into that experience intentionally, essentially what cannabis will do is pull the wool over your eyes and comfort you, make you pizza rolls like your mom did when you were younger, right? Maybe SpaghettiOs, whatever your poison of choice is, right? And then you'll come out of that experience and you'll be in the exact same place you were in, where you're feeling like you need something to feel safe. And then you'll just fall into this unconscious pattern of like, well, I know I feel better when I interact with cannabis. And so I'm going to smoke cannabis all day, every day. Right. And that's the challenge I see happening within the industry, to talk about that particularly. But, with things like DMT, what I see is that, and mushrooms and things like this too, is that people have these, at best, very incredible experiences, right? Like profound experiences, right? But if they go into unintentionally, they didn't really know what they were looking for. And so it's almost like if a kid that's 6 years old was able to open all of his Christmas presents at once, and then they were gone in 5 minutes. So he opens them all. He's like, oh my God, all this is here. And then it's gone. Right. And he's like, what did I even really see there? Right. And so if you know a direction that you want to give these plant medicines when you go to them, specifically something as fast and powerful as DMT, if you're like, okay, I want to discover who I really am. Well, then that experience is going to be driven towards that direction. Right. And so what I always tell people with any medicine, I talk about it with cannabis a lot, but with any medicine, like your intention, aka your attention, forming into attention, is your direction in that experience, right? That's your like work is not the right word, but your mission, right? Your workload in that experience is creating the direction for the medicine to go, oh, that's where you want to go. Okay, cool. Let's go. Right. But if you don't do that, the medicine tries to, like a salsa dance, right? Like if the male doesn't give the female the direction, then the female has to both be the direction and try to express herself fully. Right. And that's just a really challenging place to be in if you want the beautiful art form that is plant medicines to be able to actually help you. So what I always tell people is the most important thing is just giving it a direction, even if it's something simple. It doesn't have to be like, I want to become an infinite starseed and remember my truth as as an alien, right? It doesn't have to be like anything crazy, right? It could just simply be like, I want to find what happiness feels like. I want to enjoy this experience, right? Just some sort of direction, even if it's a little vague, right? You can start with something vague, but get into that habit of creating that intention. And really, like we were talking about in the last podcast, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you start figuring out, and this is one of the best areas I think plant medicines can help with, because things like the heart chakra, right? And really any chakra for that matter, but the chakra systems and energy and God is really challenging to understand from our left brain quantitative society. When we interact with plant medicines, we don't need to necessarily read a document or a research study that says the heart chakra exists. We just feel it's there. We're like, oh yeah, that thing's there, right? So in the same way, when we interact with plant medicines intentionally and we feel what the power of intention does, then we know like, oh, okay, that's really a real thing, right? So when I drink this cup of cacao and I put my intention on it beforehand, and then all of a sudden I start noticing like, whoa, I'm fully in my heart. That was my intention. That's really cool. Then we start being able to apply it because we have had the direct experience of it. And I think that's one of the coolest things that plant medicines bring to the table. Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Absolutely. And everything kind of like compiled into that, right? It's the map, right? If you're embarking on the journey, let's say you're going to take a cross-country journey across the United States, right? If you don't have a map or a Siri or anything, any guidance system, right? What's going to happen? You're going to start taking these loops and turns. The next thing you know, you're going down a mountain with a 60-degree slope, right? And now you're tumbling to your doom. But at the very bottom, it'll eventually coast. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the preparation, right, if you don't have that intention, the map's going to take you on a wild ride. And that's exactly what happened to me. And just kind of even sharing that experience and what you had said about how it's basically removing the veil, right? But it's holding you, right? It's holding you and comforting you in that same moment, right? It was there. It was definitely present. Like even just being immersed within that experience and to the physical things that were happening to me, you know, what was being reflected, right? As you had said, it's a direct reflection of what's happening inside of you, was chaos, pure and utter chaos and excruciating pain that I was not aware of. I was not aware of how much pain I was actually in until I was feeling it. And like you had said, I didn't need to know the pain was there. I felt it. And it felt as though the skin from my body was being ripped in half from me piece by piece. And it was so excruciating. And it was reflecting to me the suffering I was imposing on myself and projecting that onto others and seeing the chaos and the control and the grasp that I had on that, how deeply ingrained in my system that it was to suffer. And what did it show me? It showed me this is what suffering really feels like outside of the limited perspective that you currently hold. And through that was healing. It was truly an exorcism, just completely releasing. I mean, I had a burst over my spine for years from when I put 800 pounds on my back as punishment. And to feel that just fully release and to be like, whoa, my spine is a spine again. It's not a bubble of fluid. It's not a pocket of inflammation, but it's actually a spine. And now I can actually fully move my head without pain. I'm hearing these women's voices, which now I can interpret as Mother Mary Jane, right?
Yes.
As singing to me and telling me to wake up, to come home, to come back, to be present for my family, to be present with my children, saying, come back, come back, come back. And even at times experiencing these beeping sounds as though I was waking up in an operating room. I thought I was waking up in surgery or something like that. And when I sat up out of that experience and just saw the entire universe unfold, and I was sitting there within the center of all of it, I was realizing how small the problems I've created are in the actual grand scheme of things. And I felt for the first time like the smallest person in the room, which was a humbling experience to know nothing and to feel so powerless in that moment. And then to have my brother there who actually embraced me and hugged me. And it was actually the man who was embracing me and being that presence for me in that moment. And I would go back down and I went through it again because I was so resistant to what it felt like for a man to hold me, to be in the comfort in the space and feeling safe in myself, right, in the presence of other men. And it took many years to actually come to this understanding. And it was probably, I would say, about a year later, right, I had gotten into men's work. And that truly, in my opinion, and what I can perceive now, is that was the gateway to show me how to feel safe with other men, how to feel safe with myself, how to relinquish all control and the grasp that I had on life, and for medicine to serve as a teacher. But not only that, but for the other men in my life to serve as teachers, for myself to serve as my greatest teacher, rather than seeking all these external things in my life that I was attaining to that I was contributing to my worth, I should say. Women, sex, drugs, alcohol, roles, responsibilities, titles, certifications, this, that, and the third, to relinquish all of that and to be in the space of nothingness, in the center of the universe. You realize none of that shit fucking matters. Yeah. I realized none of that shit fucking matters. And that's where I really had to step in, lean into, and become the teacher and of my own self. Right. I had to be the teacher who I always wanted. I had to be the leader who I always wanted. I had to be the student, right, that I've always wanted to be. And to step into that space of nothingness and just to be a pure, open, receptible vesicle. Just putting all these words together now. It was beautiful. It was humbling. Just fucking humbling.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's kind of, misconstrued, is that if we're walking into these experiences without a map, it will humble the fuck out of you. Right.
Yeah.
And then the question is, was it necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Because we do always act unconsciously in one way or another. We do use things without knowing one way or another, but it's not until we go through those types of experiences that we actually see what it is we're doing. And then that actually serves as the portal for us to understand ourselves more fully.
Absolutely, man. What I've noticed about plant medicine specifically, but really even like meditation, things that you do in an otherwise sober state of reality, right? Depending on if you interact with cannabis or not, or mushrooms when you meditate, yada, yada. But for sake of conversation, when we interact with plant medicines, we are disintegrating, right? Like we are becoming less integrated into who and what we are in that moment before we engage with that plant medicine. And so when we come back, right, especially if we don't have a direction, that is when, you hear about these challenges people face coming back in and essentially being disintegrated, right? Like they don't know how to reintegrate into life and take what they've learned, because a lot of times they don't really know what they've learned because they didn't give it a direction. They were just kind of like a kid in a candy store looking at everything, and then they come back and they're like in their limited reality, right? And so one of the things that I've noticed for me is that the whole point of why I do a plant medicine, why I choose to sit with a plant medicine, is so I can integrate it into my day-to-day reality so that I can benefit from it, right? And so that whole shift, I didn't start there when I did plant medicines, when I first started doing them, and to be fair, I believe I was always searching for something, but I just had no idea what that was. And I had no idea the power I was playing with. And I remember the first time I was humbled. It was on a psilocybin journey. This is over 10 years ago now. And it was a psilocybin journey in which I did a heroic dose, and I had never done one before. I had done an eighth and, whatever. And I was like, well, what's another 1.5 grams? Well, the best description I got actually in this experience from the entity that is psilocybin mushrooms, because man, did they play with me this night, is they were like, hey, your whole math thing doesn't really work in our realm, right? Like when you go up in amounts, it's not like, oh, I know what 1.5 grams does. So if I add that on to 3.5, it should be that, right? It's not quantifiable that way, right? So when I decided to do this, it was actually an 18-gram tea that I split with 2 of my friends, and it was penis envies, and I had no idea at that moment about different psilocybin contents, anything, right? So I went into this completely blindsided, and we were in a good set and setting, right? We knew that much anyway. And, at this point, we were watching funny movies. We were essentially like bringing out the inner child when we interacted with psilocybin. And that is valuable. It has some value there, but the challenge is that I wasn't aware of the full spectrum of what could potentially happen in this experience. And so I didn't set an intention, and I went into it. And I remember we were watching something, and I was laughing so hard that I didn't even sound like laughter. It was kind of just like I couldn't laugh fast enough to get my like, ha 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 to come out in like waves. And so what happened was something, I don't exactly know what happened. It doesn't really matter, but something triggered in me. And I don't know if it was, like a survival instinct or something. I've never had something work like this in my body, even up until this point since, but it triggered, you're choking, you're dying, you ate mold, right? And so like this happened. It wasn't like, am I choking? It was like, no, you're definitely choking. You definitely ate mold, and you're definitely going to die. All within like a fraction of a second happened, right? And so I had this happen, right? And then as soon as it happened, like my body went into full fight or flight mode, but my mind started processing like, wait, am I really like, what's going on? But it was like the damage, quote unquote, had already been done. And so I I expressed to my friends, I was like, hey, can we just put some music on? And they were kind of like, sure, I guess, like, because I wasn't saying anything, because again, at this point I didn't feel safe, especially around men and a lot of the things you talked about. So these are some of my closest friends too, right, that I've known since childhood. And so we put the music on, and I'm literally sitting in my chair, they're behind me, and I'm like, you're okay. You're okay. And every time I say you're okay, the voice is, no, you're not. You're okay. No, you're not. You're okay. No, you're not. Right. So it was like playing with me, and it was like the breaking point. So then I decided, all right, I'm going to go to the bathroom and try to puke these mushrooms up. Right. And we had made a tea with them, which, if you understand tea, it converts the psilocybin into psilocin quicker with the lemon tech. And, I was just along for the ride. I bought the ticket and I was now taking the ride. And, this is when an experience can turn into an ordeal real quickly. Right. And it's like that interesting translation between language, And so I go to the bathroom, I'm pacing. All the while, I still think that I'm dying, right? And so I'm trying to puke, nothing's coming up, right? And about 5-10 minutes goes by, I'm pacing. I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then all of a sudden, the mushroom entity, whatever you want to call that, or my higher self, whatever you want to call it, just started laughing hysterically at me, right? And there was a moment where I was like, wait a minute. If my throat was really closing up, I would have already been dead. And that was when they were just like, well, essentially, it was more of a feeling than actual words, but I'll try to put it into words. They were like, hey, we're really teaching you because luckily you were in the right setting for this, right? Like, lucky you're safe where you're at, right? But we needed to humble you, right? To use that language in order for you to really see what you're playing with here. Because, at the end of the day, these are not, fun toys to adventure with. Like, sure, they can have moments where they're fun and exciting, right? But they also have other sides to them. And those sides are more often than not what you need more than the fun and excitement. And so after that, I left the bathroom. They were like, all right, now go lay in your bed and have the best time of your life, basically, right? Like, now you've been checked, and like, we know that you got the message, right? So I lay down in my bed, and this is one of the only times that I've like truly hallucinated in my life, where I thought I was laying like this for a long time. And for people that are just listening, I thought both of my hands were under my head, right? Like classic sleeping position. And I was like full on just like in the astral realm, right? Like, if you want to follow mystery school, 6th, 7th spiritual dimension, Akashic zone, just enamored, right? And just in awe of what I was experiencing, right? And from that point forward, there were some challenging things, but I had already passed the big challenging episode. So there were some things where I'd be like, oh, okay, that's fear. Oh, okay, that's excitement. Oh, wow, like that's a side of me I haven't seen, right? So I was just like really exploring and taking inventory of who I was and yada, yada. And so then about, I don't know, probably 3 hours later, I go to move my arms, right? And again, I thought they were right here, and my left arm was like down somewhere to my side. And when I went to move it, I felt it move down there, and I was like, whoa. And that was like one of the trippiest things I've ever gone through. And so that whole experience, similar to yours, really humbled me and led to every other plant medicine experience I've had being extremely well thought out and felt into. Like, is this really what my soul is calling for? Or is it my ego telling me my soul is calling for it because it wants like a new lease on reality, right? It's sick of what it's going through and it just wants to escape, right? And in many cases, I discover, like through journaling or through maybe sitting with cannabis and kind of getting the mind out of the way, like you don't need another journey at all right now. You're still integrating and you haven't really even begun on that journey. And so, yeah, it's really interesting how that stuff happens. And, it's fun talking about this stuff because, this is really like why I started this podcast, right? It wasn't to, talk about all the glitz and glam, around plant medicines. It was to really like allow people to realize that, hey, although these things are being destigmatized, although there's research coming up from very prestigious organizations, and although these things can be the best thing that ever happens to you in your life, they can also traumatize you, right? And they can also lead to a lot of confusion in day-to-day reality. And so it's important to understand the full scope of what is a potential of happening within these experiences to be able to actively use discernment in choosing whether or not these medicines are right for you at any one particular time or in general within your life.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your experience as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I've definitely been on that rickety rock, we'll say. Not to that extent, right? But there's just the observation of, well, if I was going to die, it would have happened already. Like,
Yeah.
Interesting. And then you go on this beautiful journey, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, okay. But it's true, right? It's like, we're not just playing with a set of Tonka trucks anymore, right? And these things are doing amazing things, so many amazing things. And we see the trials that are coming out. We see what MAPS is doing. We see what San Francisco Psychedelic Society is doing. We see a lot of these organizations coming up and sharing this beautiful thing. And I think a concern here, and this is just speaking to present real time concern, is the fact that people are lacking the reverence in which we, right, had to experience and develop, which again, it's part of their process. They need to experience that for themselves. Great. But other than discernment, there is a sense of responsibility, right? Once we have these experiences, once we have the knowings that we do, the experiences that we've had to move through, quite honestly, to develop this level of responsibility in the first place, right? It's being imposed, or it's being abused, or it's being demonstrated as a means for people to attain something, right? And I'm being very delicate with the way I word this, but to attain something that's already there. People are painting these portraits that aren't quite the reality, right? You see it on Instagram a lot. And I know a few accounts specifically, in which I won't name for integrity purposes, but there are accounts that are promoting this medicine in a way that is, or could be, very harmful, very detrimental. These are people that, outside of the experience, right? And I'm not sure if you've gone through any formal education, but there are so many levels for this, bro. Like, yes. I went through the psychedelic integration program with Being True to You, and I went through the program through San Francisco Psychedelic Society, and I'm looking at all of these variables that are moving within the constructs of what this thing really is, right? And that's not being shared. It's like, oh, here's all the benefits. Here's all the benefits. Here's all the benefits. Nothing could happen. Nothing can be, bad from this at all, right? And there is a sense of egoic drive there, right? Whether it's for monetary reasons, whether it's for clout, right, or fame reasons, to be seen or heard, or to have a new opportunity to speak on a subject and to be more recognized in the space, right? We see a lot of these things now. But what's not being shared is, what was your most painful moment from this?
Yes.
Really? What the fuck was that? And what did that feel like to be in that? And why are we not sharing that responsibility as well, right? Because, yes. I mean, we spoke on Newton in our last podcast, right? But in that third law, right, every force has an equal and opposite force, right? So if we're talking about all the benefits, we should also be addressing some of the risks. And not to say just the risks, but not just our quote unquote good experiences, right? But the experiences that ripped us fucking open and humbled the fuck out of us to make us understand that this is not just something you do. This is not something that you actively seek out. It calls to you.
Yes.
And when it calls to you, there has to be a sense of responsibility and reverence present, or else we're leading the world astray. We're leading the world into believing that this magical thing has no limits or repercussions, when in reality, this could be a driving force that potentially may catapult somebody to either ending their life or ripping apart everything that they currently have and completely disintegrating their own reality from that.
Yes.
Right? And those are very important points. It's not just the good side of it, but also the evil that can ensue if the internal work, the foundation, is not sturdy enough to build this fucking building on.
Yes.
Right?
Dude, that is exactly my feelings on this. And I've been noticing some accounts too. I'm curious if there are similar ones than that you mentioned. And my best theory on it is that, if I choose to believe that everyone's doing the best they can with the information they have available, maybe these people are honestly scared of what they know is a possibility too. And so they believe that by talking about the benefits, hey, like attracts like, more attention goes, energy flows, right? So if I talk about the positive benefits, maybe I'm going to help people have more positive benefits. But the challenging thing is, right, is that in my experience with plant medicines, the most powerful and potent medicine journeys I've gone on have been the most challenging, right? And so it's not even about talking about the negatives. It's like, hey, don't do them because of this, right? It's more about like, hey, understand that like, this is why you have a good guide. This is why you look into your shaman and their lineage and what they're, looking into and who they trained with and all this stuff, right? Because when the challenges arise, not if, but when, because if you play with plant medicines enough, they are going to come up, right? And so in that moment, how can you have faith, right? We talked about faith in the last podcast. How can you have faith that, oh, this is good, right? So it's almost like recalibrating what is good and what is considered quote unquote bad, right? Because I know for me, and I imagine for you, when I was growing up, people would be like, oh, mushrooms, acid, amazing, but just be careful, you might have a bad trip, right? And so first of all, that is like one of the worst things to program someone with, right? Because then you think that there's a good outcome and a bad outcome, and that one is terrible, right? And you essentially failed, and then one is desired, right? And so what that creates is then a duality, in the sense that when people are going into this, the second things start getting challenging, they're immediately like, oh shit, I'm having a bad trip. Oh shit, right? Versus like, oh, I'm about to learn something deep, right? And so it's really the perception of how we're viewing these things that I feel is one of the biggest challenges with, these types of accounts, being like, oh, here's all the benefits, right? I think if those accounts decided with their status and their awareness, right? Because a lot of these accounts are bigger accounts. If they decided to go, hey, here's some of the challenges that you could run into, and making it more aware that, like, hey, these challenges are actually one of the best aspects of plant medicines. But to go into a ceremony without the awareness that these types of things exist is, at best, just selling yourself short. At worst, potentially a very traumatizing event waiting to occur. And if we can recalibrate people to almost not so much go the direction where they're excited about bad experiences, but more like, I'm okay with whatever happens because I have faith that whatever happens is exactly what is meant to happen. I think that's where I'd like to see these conversations go to. And that's why I love having these conversations on the podcast, right? Because you and I are both proponents of conscious, intentional plant medicine use, even though we've both been bit by our own, lack of creating intention and doing the things that every lineage talks about for a very good reason, right? That being said, we're still supporters of this, but at the same time, we're not objectively supporters. We're not like, yep, in every scenario with every person, I think everyone should do this. That is completely silly, right? I don't think these medicines are meant for everyone, as I imagine you feel as well. I don't think that every situation is great I think that probably very few situations are great for this type of work. And at the same time, I know from my own experience, subjectively, what they've done for me, and I can speak to that. But when people ask me about these things, I'm like, hey, listen, this is your own journey. Like, you can ask me for what my experiences have been. We can have these conversations. But if you're looking for me to be the permission slip for you to either say yes or no to this, that's one area where, if you're externalizing your personal power there, you're probably not ready to interact with the plant medicine, because you're going to start externalizing the challenging aspects to the medicine. And then therefore, you're not going to be able to actually integrate that lesson you learned about what essentially plant medicines were showing you about yourself and mirroring back to you. And that can lead to quite a few different challenging aspects reintegrating back in, if we are even able to reintegrate that and integrate it into our day-to-day life and come out feeling fuller than we went in.
Right. And it's that permission slip, right? It's like when people will ask me, just as they've asked you, like, well, is this something that I should do? Like, how should I do it? There's a lot of fine lines there, right? And there's a lot of fine lines that can, but also at the same time, maybe shouldn't be crossed through the guidance of someone like this, right? At least in normal daily conversations or interactions, right? And I speak to these other larger accounts, and not from a place of like judgment, right? Because it's like, that's what they know. And they probably are operating with the best of intent. And who knows, they may not have even had that type of experience to even speak to that to begin with, which again, will attract a certain type of person, but when that does come, how are we, as you had spoken to, how are we integrating that, right? How are we integrating that piece? How are we having the conversations around the things that could and probably will happen, because they're not for everyone. And a lot of people in society now are walking around with unresolved trauma and things that they may not even be aware of. And again, that's their journey. I'm not one to judge. I'm working on constantly how to be more accepting of the all, of everyone else too, even just with the understanding I know of myself. And that's a challenge, right? Because it's a challenge. And I'm sure that you've maybe even had these experiences as well, which I think are really good to touch up on, is, the mixture of, like, let's say psilocybin and alcohol, right? And where I'm at in Scottsdale, Arizona, right? People have the money. They hear great things about mushrooms, so they just take them, right? And then they'll take them and they'll go out to the bar scene and then they'll have a couple drinks. And, that in itself can be an experience. That in itself can be a ceremony, but I'm curious, right? What's the intention for that? Because I know that anytime I've done that, I might be projecting my own experience, is I've needed that to feel a certain type of way to interact with other people and externalizing my worth in a way that may not be conducive to what the medicine's actually designed for.
Yes.
And that can go very bad, right? I mean, even looking at the way that alcohol interacts with the chemical components of psilocybin, looking at the way alcohol interacts with the chemical components of anything. I mean, you hear about people overdosing on MDMA all the time. And what happens at the cellular level? And are these things being taken into consideration? Are we paying these medicines the respect in which they need in order for us to have these fulfilling, enlightening experiences that we all want to attain from them? You know, and that is a concern, right? There is a concern that all of these good things, right, positive things, right, based off perception, right, dualistic identification of good or inadvertently bad, right? How are we labeling these things? What are we using to justify these claims? How are we using these claims for, you know, the greater good of all, right? Versus, right, just our own projected belief of what it should be, right? Because, I mean, you can't say that there's any right way to do things. There's no wrong way to do things, but there are certain things that we can do to do things in a way that has more reverence and intention, designed to where we're not, you know, maybe unconsciously or recklessly, I should say, going out to the bar scenes and drinking, you know, hard whiskey or vodka or whatever your drink is with this medicine. And what happens when that interaction occurs? Because like you had your own experience, right? Something can be, right, I forgot the exact word you use, but something can be an ordeal, right? Very quickly, right? Yes. This is just an experience and this can be an ordeal. But when that line gets crossed and you're in a public setting and there are other things moving around you, right? What does that do to the psyche, right? And what does that really imply about what's happening within you, right? And what does somebody even do there? Right? That's a very challenging place to be. And that in itself will probably have and contain enough information for you to know what you're really messing with, right? So there are concerns. There are very real concerns. It's not for everybody, right? I take people through Rohan therapy, which is the primary modality I use in a lot of my healing work. And that's not for everybody, right? Alcohol is not for everybody, right? We can choose all these different substances and things that we do in life. And that is where the radical act and practice of discernment comes in.
Yes.
Right. And it's even with any plant medicine and looking at it. And am I using this to elevate my experience? Am I looking to enlighten or expand myself in different ways? Or am I using this to contract myself? Am I looking at this as a means to avoid or escape my reality? And at what point does this actually become, right, the illusion of what I'm already creating? Is this actually my escape, right? And how often do I seek to escape this thing? And when do I escape this, even when I'm not using plant medicine, right? Could be the lesson, right, and inherently there too, right? So there are always two sides of the coin, right? But there are questions that we should be asking, right, before just blindly saying, yeah, I'm going to do that.
100%. And this is one of the biggest challenges I found with, you know, the beginning of drug prohibition, right? The Just Say No campaign, all these things. They taught this, like, they instilled rather this thing of like, ooh, these things are bad, right? And now, in a very short amount of time later, when you really think about it, now there's prestigious organizations coming out with really amazing information and scientific studies saying the benefits of these, right? But they're a lot of times these studies are just, they're doing a study, right? So of course the set and setting, right? Of course they're there being safe. Of course they're doing these things, right? And of course that will probably be stated in that long study, but most people are not going to read the study. They're going to read the abstract where they're like, yeah, mushroom's good. Okay, cool, perfect, right? And they're not going to really do the legwork to figure out like, well, what created that good experience, right? Was it simply the medicine, or was it where the person was at, the therapist they had around with them, the safety protocols that were gone through, you know, all of these different measures that make up a incredible experience, right? That can make up an incredible experience. And then when you go from that whole drug prohibition era to now, like, really quickly being like, wow, these things are amazing for so many different things, which I truly believe is completely accurate, right? Like, anyone who has had experiences on plant medicines understands these things are very real possibilities, that yes, you can literally change your whole life in a profound way that is unable to be put into words. But at the same time, I think this is what we're both talking to here with these accounts and whatnot. It's like, guys, if you have an account and you're like, you're someone who's had good experience with this, it's your responsibility, right? Because with great power comes great responsibility. If you're going to be talking about these things, don't talk about them unless you understand the full scope of what's out there and what's possible to be experienced. Because what can happen a lot, especially with influencers and even with like these amazing studies that are coming out, I don't really feel it's any fault of the study or really any fault of the influencer necessarily, but it's all of it put together where it's like, well, now these things are amazing, so they must be amazing all the time, right? So they don't go into the quantitative measures of like setting, what has your diet been like, the past month? Are you consuming alcohol or other, drugs at the same time? Are you in a public place, again, setting, or the more qualitative measures of like, hey, who grew the mushrooms? Who grew the cannabis, right? What was the energy and consciousness level of that individual, right? Because when someone is cultivating something, their consciousness level is what you're going to be experiencing, right? Like you're going to be experiencing your own experience through the filter of what their consciousness is able to hold. And this is why, like, I'm so opposed in a lot of ways to the ways in which we'll use cannabis, for instance, because I worked in the industry. I know what most of, not all, but a lot, I'll say a lot of these growers' lives are like, right? They're eating absolute shit, right? They're usually getting plastered drunk and sometimes still showing up late to work, still drunk, right? They're not really getting paid a lot in most cases, unless you're the head grower. And even then there's a lot of argument to be had depending on what state you're in. And then they're coming in and they're working with a spiritual medicine, right? And not only that, but they're growing these plants usually under grow lights, which haven't been balanced out with a system such as biogeometry. There's no awareness of EMFs because, hey, we can't see them, so they don't exist, right? That typical quantitative measure of like, well, I only see 4% of visible reality, so 4% of what's out there is all it exists, right? And so there are all these different things that come into play. And this is why, once again, I love this podcast, because I really created it as an educational platform, right? Where people can come and they can hear the full scope, right? You can hear the amazing highs people have had. You can hear the incredibly traumatizing events people have had. And then also you can hear like, hey, if a traumatizing thing happens, right? This might be something you can try in addition to that, right? Therapy, coaching, I forget the method Rohan, is it Rohan?
Yeah, Rohan.
Yeah, Rohan. Like these types of things that you can do to like reintegrate yourself, right? So there are options, right? Because I imagine. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? I wanted to stop by while I had your ear and share a very special announcement with you. You may have heard people say that we are facing an epidemic of loneliness in the world right now. We believe that this is only half of the story, and that the real epidemic and the root of feeling loneliness is a lack of connection. Do you want to connect to more purpose and passion with the important work you are doing? Do you wish you had closer friendships with people who understand you, listen to you, and are truly present with you? Are you wishing you and your partner could move deeper into love together? The connection in all of these areas comes down to the one most important element of connection: the ability to connect with yourself. If you are ready to see change in your life, if you are ready to feel differently when you wake up in the morning, if you are ready to step into the life you envision for yourself, the first and only route to making these changes is settling in, quieting down, and being able to connect to yourself. Now, this can be a major challenge in today's world with media, culture, and other energies that pull us out of our ability to connect. When you've tried fitness, meditation, and other self-development practices and still find yourself feeling alone and lacking connection, you may be feeling out of options and wondering if you'll ever be able to tap into your full potential that you know deep down is possible in your life. What we have found in working with our clients is that plant medicines, and cannabis in particular, can guide us in having the experience of what true connection looks and feels like. In this way, cannabis can act as a rite of passage for connection and a gateway toward the spouse, tribe, mission, and life you know you are ready for. Now, the pitfall here is that many people become codependent on the medicines, such as cannabis, and expect the medicine to do the work for them. If this continues, what will happen is the user will find themselves reaching for more and more cannabis to feel connection, without taking ownership of their role in the outcome of their experience, and thus they will fall into repeating the same painful patterns. As Zen Buddhism teaches, how you do anything is how you do everything. Therefore, If this painful pattern is showing up in your relationship with cannabis, it is likely a reflection of the same patterns you're experiencing in your friendships, romantic relationships, business, and your relationship with yourself. Learning to work with cannabis effectively will supercharge your experience and will help you get the result you are actually seeking, which is connection. We created a program to support seekers and high achievers like you in doing exactly this. To learn how to work with the healing power of cannabis to connect you back to yourself so you can unlock purpose, passion, and creativity in all areas of your life. What this program will give you is the long-lost user manual for cannabis. This user manual will teach you how to connect with cannabis correctly so that the plant can act as your spiritual aid and ally in life, just as our ancestors understood and practiced. If you're ready to unlock the full power of cannabis, meet like-minded people on the same path as you, build more purpose into your life, and have the most fun doing homework you've ever had, this message is for you. To learn more and qualify for your spot in the program, hop over to our Instagram profile at highly.optimized and book a discovery call. The conscious cannabis revolution is here. Will you be joining us? Sending all of you love. Enjoy the rest of the show. You know, for a lot of people that I've talked to, they get traumatized and then like they're afraid to admit it because society, especially now, is saying these things are great, right? So if they go out and saying like, hey, I really got hurt, right? And this is also really relevant to certain things, let's just say for sake of vagueness, that are going on in our current reality, right? Something is perceived as all good, right, by the powers that be. And then people that get injured from these things don't feel they have a voice because people call them crazy. No, these scientific organizations have said they're great, right? And I'm not saying that's exactly happening with psychedelics, but it's in the realm of possibility, right? With the perception of how the human psyche looks at things like, well, I don't want to be that guy, like these things are helping a lot of people. And, maybe I did get a little traumatized, but, I don't want that to take away from someone else's thing. All of these types of things are why having educational platforms, which are neutral in nature like this, are so powerful, because this is really what the world needs more than ever is, unchoreographed conversations, right? Dialogue, right? Where there's no like agenda, where we're not trying to say they're good or they're bad. It's just like, these are our experiences. Do your research and come to your own conclusion. I'm never going to recommend anything. You're never going to recommend anything. We're just going to talk about our experiences like unadulterated and let people make up their own conclusions. Because, I think that one of the best gifts that we can give people, especially as, coaches and guides, right, is the ability to realize their autonomous nature, their sovereign nature, right? Their ability to create their own life, and that nothing is inherently bad or good, but yet it's the mind that makes it so, right? I forget who said that, but that's a famous quote. I didn't say it exactly the same way. I butcher quotes all the time, but at the same time, it's really our perception of things that makes them what they are, right? And so, if you're someone who's looking into these things, continue looking into it, right? And you'll know when it's a calling versus a desire, right? And I'm not saying that one is necessarily good and one is bad, but it's just, again, discernment. What have your desires done for you in the past versus what are your callings done for you, right? And being able to weigh those things and take those experiences in and be able to, really gain awareness, because awareness, I really feel, is the name of the game. It's awareness.
Yeah, man. Desires and callings, right? It's so beautifully put that way, because a calling is something that asks something of you, right? It presents an opportunity and invites you to show up in a greater potential. Whereas a desire is always, if we are desiring something, right? And some might disagree, but there's always a sense of scarcity, right? If we are desiring something, it could be primordial in nature, right? We see a man or another woman and we're attracted to them and we have this desire, right? But where is that desire coming from, right? What are we really seeking from that? And it's not always the case, but a lot of the case, right? At least in my own experience, right? It comes from a place of scarce. It comes from a place of lack. It comes from a place of, I don't feel connected to human beings and I want to connect to this human being, right? Even being a place of scarcity, right? Or curiosity, depending on what you're working with, right? And everybody's different, right? And that's the thing about these studies too, right? Yes, they were taken into being a control group A, control group B, right? They're doing all that. And most people will go to the abstract, but are they really applying that study to the individual, right? Or to the complete collective of everybody having that same setting, environment, therapeutic component, dosaging, everything like that, right? But in the outside world and what we're working with, that's not always realistic, right? We don't have a clinical space. Most of us are doing this shit in our living room or in the woods, right? So it's like, how are we replicating this information? And you touched on something super important, because the plant, right? And a lot of people, they see them as supplements, right? But they're energetic. They have their own realm of consciousness. They have their own, right, individual thoughts and natures that exist within them. And just like our animals, we'll put it into a food setting. We consume the animals on these farms. And now we're asking the same questions, right? Where was this animal raised? What were they fed? What was the nature of their care, right? And we'll apply these things into our food. But it's very rare that we're asking these things of these plant medicines, right? Why we're not doing so, I'm not really sure. And again, that can just, again, be from my own observation of the space, again, without judgment. I'm not judgmental of it all. I'm just inquiring further, like, are these things people are talking about, right? And I'm really glad that you touched on that, because it's like, are we asking where this was cultivated? Are we looking at even the consciousness of the person taking care of it, and what you had alluded to in even the dispensary spaces, right? It's like, how are these people showing up to work, right? Are they nourishing and are they cultivating this sacred medicine with love, or are they doing it with deep remorse? If they're doing it with regret, with resentment, with anger, and knowing that energy, right, just as food is, how people make food or cook food with love, as we've all been told, right? How are these being brought into the world, into our understanding, into our presence with that same emotion, with that same energy, which is influencing the chemical structure of things? We see it in water, right? We drop something in water and there's an emotion associated to it, and the crystallization forms in a completely different way. So this vibration still applies across the board with our medicine and with our animals, with whatever we're consuming or using.
Yes, dude. I mean, you're speaking my language. Like, this is where I think that, like the alchemists, right, of the past, the reason they were able to do what they did and create such incredible feats is because science and spirituality were one thing to them. It was all like science, right? It just made sense, right? And I think somewhere along the way, we decided that we only believed in what we saw, right? And you can look at it evolutionarily speaking as when we moved more into a left brain, into our left brain as a society versus the right brain. And the left brain is great. It's essentially our calculator, right? So like driving a car, right? Putting on your socks, right? Like those are great things for the left brain. But when you start asking deeper questions about like, how is this grown, right? What is the energetic signature? Those are things that the left brain kind of goes, huh? Right? But what you can do is the right brain is your experiencer, right? For lack of a better term. And so, what I do is when I am traveling and I have to interact with, not have to, but I choose to interact with medicine, cannabis, for instance, that I get at the dispensary, I can feel the energetic difference from stuff that I've cultivated, right? And again, you could say, oh, well, you've cultivated, so it's your baby. Yeah, sure, right? And I'm not saying that all the cannabis I interact with is terrible, right? I interact with some good stuff, but I can just feel the energetic signature, like, this needed some more love. Or like, hey, this guy or girl, whoever grew this, they did a pretty good job. This is awesome, right? And you can feel the consciousness of the plant, right? And I think one of the biggest challenges here is that in terms of like what we're talking about, we're a very small fraction of individuals, especially in the Western world, who understand this and are open to it, right? Because most people are not even aware that everything in life is sentient, right? That everything has some level of consciousness. Because if we are all vibrational energy, then everything is at a different level of vibration. And vibration is synonymous with consciousness, right? Like vibration is what in many ways could be looked at as causing consciousness, right? So, as we look at like things like rocks, right? And even more so like things like animals, right? As like, oh, they're just an animal and it doesn't really matter, how they're grown and developed or whatever. It's really like this very immature way of looking at life, right? And I don't say immature in a judgmental way, right? Because I was there at one point too, right? It's more of just I can use discernment now rather than judgment to go, hey, that way of living did not work out well for me. So I chose something different, right? But never am I going to say you should be looking at it this way, right? Because you know what? If someone is genuinely interested, like, hey, Ryan or Nathan, like that thing you guys were talking about, like, where did you learn that? Like, I'm curious to learn more. Then the invitation has been made. And I know in my human design, my main strategy is waiting for the invitation, right? So I speak my ultimate truth without fear of who is going to like me or dislike me, because at the end of the day, there's 7.5 billion people on the planet. I'm not looking to be liked by everyone. That would be exhausting, right? So to the degree that we speak our authentic truth from within, we will find people who are genuinely interested, and they go, hey, I'm curious to learn more about that. What do you got going on there? Right. And then we give our attention to those people. Right. And the other people who are like, that's bullshit. Hey, they'll go find someone else who resonates with them. And that's perfect. Right. There's no right or wrong. It's just, I always, once again, relate it back to food, and specifically ice cream. It's like, what flavor of ice cream do people like? Right. So maybe it's the flavor of ice cream we're speaking. Maybe it's the flavor of ice cream that the powers that be speak. Right. There's no right or wrong, but it's just like using discernment and figuring out which one works for them. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges I see, though, is that right now we're going through a period where the earth is showing us in many ways that it is sick. Right. And I use the analogy of like E.T. and Elliot, where like there was a connection there where E.T. started to get sick, Elliot got sick, right? And so the reason why I feel we're seeing so many mental health disorders and so much violence, so much rage, right, is because we are experiencing the health of the planet as a whole, right? And, only certain people within this collective are choosing to look at that because it sucks and it's really painful in a lot of ways. And that's one of the main things that I've experienced on plant medicines too, is the plants like reverberating this to me of like, hey, the planet is in really dire straits right now. Like it's being, raped in a lot of ways. Right. And so a lot of what you can feel in this isn't even necessarily quote unquote yours individually, but we all come from the collective, which is what I choose to believe. So it is yours in some way, shape, or form. And you could look at it as karma. You could look at it as a bunch of different things, but it is meant to be felt. And if you're unaware of the full range and color spectrum of what is possible to be felt on these experiences, then you're going to be awestruck and potentially traumatized when those different flavors that you didn't know existed present themselves, because you're like, wait, this isn't right, quote unquote, right? Versus having faith and going, whatever happens is exactly what's meant to happen. Two totally different energetic signatures.
Absolutely. And what you're speaking to in that collective unconscious realm is knowing that we are a personal, individual unit of that collective unconscious, right? Mm-hmm. And there's numerous studies that show, right, 90% unconscious, right? We're just going to throw ballpark, right? Statistically, that's what they say, right? And to know that we are a part of that 90%, and what you're saying and speaking to is, what we're feeling may not even be ours, right? It may be the world's, it may be the earth, and that's kind of what we're talking about and alluding to in a lot of different ways here, is that radical process of discernment, even within, immersed in an experience such as the unexplainable, the paranormal, right? Which is what these psychedelic experiences do. They pull these things up, especially from our lower three energy centers, right? Just like we said, like we don't need to know about the heart chakra. We feel it, right? Just like we feel the root, we feel the sacral, we feel the solar plexus, we feel all these things coming up into us and into our crown, into our spiritual knowing center, our understanding center of how we perceive reality, and then how we judge it through our third eye, and how we practice that discernment through our third eye, and then express that through our throat, through our voice. The whole energetic signature behind that is fascinating as it is. It's fucking paranormal in itself. That's why a lot of us, even if though we may not know quite yet, but we do have psychic abilities. We're all innately psychic in our own ways. We have much more beyond the first five senses, right? We do have these gifts of vision. We do have these gifts of hearing. We do have these gifts of feeling and gifts of knowing, right? And to fully understand that and integrate that within the collective unconscious realm, which is what psychedelics are essentially designed to do, is to pull everything from the unconscious into conscious for you to look at right in the face. When we're talking about it's going to mirror what's happening internally, it's going to mirror the unconscious realms of you that are not being addressed fully, in order to bring it into our conscious awareness to then address, understand, and resolve and integrate in a way that is effective, right? So when we look at these spectrums, right, and we start seeing all of it unfold, right, the nature of that person curating and nurturing and cultivating this medicine, right, is passed on, just like we were given or handed beliefs even when we were within the womb. If we think that we don't have any energetic signature of our mother always because we were within her womb, it's foolish. Yes. We were a part of her. We were literally connected by an umbilical cord, where it wasn't just nutrients to develop our physical fetal body. It was the energetic signature which started forming how we were going to perceive the world as we were birthed through the womb.
Yes.
Right? and how we carry that energy and what is being cultivated in the space of creation, right? Creation of the medicine, creation of ourselves, and how these things coincide and interact with one another as we evolve in this human form, right? And it's that process of discernment, and it's identifying what's ours, what's not ours. And that opens and lifts the veil for us to see clearly, more fully, right? What is really calling to us on the other side.
Absolutely, man. Like that brought up quite a few things for me. And, one of it was the fact that, in addition to what you were saying too, like DNA, right? Like DNA holds the wins essentially and the traumas of past generations, right? It also holds within it the tree of life, right? Which is everything, right? And that's why one of the main reasons why I get very concerned when certain things are known to, interact with DNA on a certain level, right? Let's just, talk vaguely here, right? But, a lot of people fail to realize how much DNA is past the quantitative measures of it and how much it's roped into our purpose, our reason for being here, right? Our soul mission, if you will, all of these types of things. And so, when someone is cultivating this medicine, it's a real big honor, right? And a lot of times, like, what I've seen in the cannabis industry specifically is like this full worship of the quantitative measures. Well, what's your highest THC? I mean, when I worked at the dispensary, this is pretty much how every conversation went. Hey, how you doing today? Great. What you got for the highest THC? Oh, this, right? Then no mention of like, I'm looking for this in effect. I'm feeling this today and I'm curious what you have that would assist in that, right? No questions of that. And again, why would they ask that? They've never been trained to ask those things, right? So it's not anyone's fault necessarily. It's just what it is, right? And, the challenging thing is that, yes, while cannabis can give you very deep and terrifying experiences, I would argue that they're less likely unless you really mess up in terms of like edible cannabis. Because if you inhale cannabis, generally speaking, within 2 hours, you're going to be coming down and you're going to realize not to do that again. That being said, though, with something like mushrooms that you're eating, it's much more challenging because, they can bring you to much different areas and especially, areas within. And so being able to, once again, discern that and realize like, okay, I have things going on inside of me. Who am I choosing to interact with these medicines with? And if it's like a random group of people, for instance, at like an ayahuasca ceremony, do I have a shaman who can help me, not pick up the things that other people are bringing into the ceremony, things like that. So, really in that way, it's not about like, oh, you should always do it with only people or you should always do it, with a guide. It's just, having awareness, right? Like having the awareness to be able to create the discernment necessary to be able to have the experience that is right for you and to be able to comprehend it as exactly what is meant to happen, right? I think that's like, the big thread we've been working on here. And, something that, is really, passionate for me to, instill in the people that I teach, cannabis to and connect with cannabis. And the conversations I have on this podcast and also on Highly Optimized too is, really, what I want, my goal, right, for everyone on this planet, if someone asks me, what is your goal for humanity, right? It's for them to realize that they have all the power within them to create whatever reality they want, right? And their will is the key to everything. And so to the degree that other people tell them things and they're told things is the degree to which they're essentially still a child in a lot of ways, right? Because you tell a child, don't touch the hot stove, right? Because sometimes you don't want the child to have to figure it out on their own, right? Even though most cases the child will continue doing it until he actually gets burned or she gets burned, and then they'll know not to do it, right? But I think the challenge is that because we go through so much schooling and that oftentimes gets in the way of our education, that, by the time we're 22 and we've graduated college, or even 18 and we've, left school, or even if we drop out before that, right? Our most developmental years have been within this confine of people telling us what to learn, telling us, why things are important, telling us what is possible for us in our life. Oh, do this because there's security. Don't go to this type of thing. Don't do this kind of career because there's no security there. That by the time we officially start even questioning, like, what am I actually doing here? We have a lot to unprogram, right? And what an amazing journey, right? But at the same time, if we go into a psychedelic experience, let's use that for an example, with a lot of that conditioning still there, and we're unaware of how much conditioning we have and how like programmed we've been, that's when things can get challenging real quick. And if you don't have someone around that can hold that space and be able to help you through that process, you're on your own. Right. And that can be a very challenging and scary thing to go through.
Absolutely. And what you're speaking to now is exactly what we were kind of talking about before. It's that it's psychedelic medicine specifically has been a point of damnation, essentially, ever since the 70s, right? Even maybe even before that, right? And now, not only are we working around the constructs and the beliefs that were formed through early developmental years of saying that this is how the way to act, this is how the way to live, this is right, this is wrong, X, Y, and Z. Now, when we start factoring in plant medicine specifically, now we're not only combating that, but the conflict there is I was told something was inadvertently bad and horrible and harmful and illegal, but now it's this amazing thing. So where's the comprehension and the awareness, right? Where's the North Star there, right?
Yes.
Where's our internal guidance system really pointing us towards? And it's not so much as to say like, this is how it's supposed to be, like, but who do you need there? What do you need in order for that to really transcend beyond your own understanding in a way that's conducive and feels, right, designed for you, right? Not to say it's right for you, but is it designed for you? And does that design contain the information within it for us to see the schematics that created the blueprints and the imprints of that, so that way we can fully digest it and then integrate it into our life, right? I think that's what you're speaking to here, right?
Absolutely. And, like the analogy that just came through for me, right, is, if a hurricane is coming, right, and you could, your house or your place of dwelling could potentially be in the path of a hurricane, what might you do, right? You're going to prepare. You're going to maybe board up your windows. You're going to make sure your cars aren't underneath a tree, right? You're going to get things in order, not because it's necessarily going to hit you, but you'd rather have those things in place and not need them than need them and not have them in place, right? And so it's very similar with plant medicines. It's, if you don't understand what a hurricane is, then you have no way of knowing what to do to prepare for it, right? So it's in learning about what a hurricane is and what they can do in terms of damage that allows you to be able to, in this scenario where one is coming in your path of dwelling, be able to actually prepare for that. And, another analogy is that of like airbags and seatbelts, right? Like, we don't necessarily, if we didn't know what could happen in the car accident, we wouldn't know why we should wear a seatbelt. But when we go through driver's ed, they show us some pretty gruesome things, right, that allow us to be like, yeah, I'm going to click that thing, right? Not just because, hey, I'm going to get a ticket if I don't, right? But also like, I want to be able to be alive if I, God forbid, get in an accident, right? And then also like having the airbags and everything, right? So it's not about necessarily, planning for those things. But again, it's better to have them and not need them than need them and not have them.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love those analogies. And it's, another component to that is even like you had given the driver's education, it's using the model of others' experiences as a framework of what tools might need to be required, right? And that's really the powerful, potent aspects of these conversations is hearing these experiences and knowing like, oh, that actually could happen, right? Just as we go through driver's ed and we don't know that is how the accident is going to end for us, but it is a possibility, right? So what things do we have in place? What are we using for seatbelts and what are our airbags and how do those look and feel for us, right? Do we feel like this is a little bit over the top? Well, maybe, but if there's a possibility, right? How does it look in real time to me? What's realistic and what would actually be more supportive, right? Because a lot of these things people can look at and they're seen as a what if, right? Worst case scenario. But if you walk into a psychedelic experience with worst case scenario, chances are it's going to happen, right? So
do not recommend.
It's like, how do we create that in a way that's supportive rather than reactive, right?
Yes.
Right.
Proactive.
How do we support this, right?
Yeah.
Rather than react to something that could be ill or fatal or whatever the case may be, right? And I think that's comes with the intention. It comes with the awareness. It comes within the culmination of everything we've been talking to. And these are just all considerations, right? They're all conceptions, as we had kind of discussed on the last podcast, are these conceptions or notions of what might ensue, what might happen, what might occur to have us believe that this is the way things are, when that's not quite often the case, not so much how it is. Because just like any psychedelic experience, and you had mentioned this before, that it's like, well, I can't really describe it. I can't really put it into words, but I can kind of do the best that I can, right?
Yeah.
That's really, in my experience with psychedelics, it's like I'm always doing the best that I can with what I have available. And whatever's there, I just need to trust that I'm there. And there's a reason behind it. It's the comprehension of what is being presented, right? Rather than seeing it all as these terrifying or misleading things that it could take us down, right?
Yes. And, I choose to believe, not because I can prove it quantitatively, but because I've experienced it myself, that when you gain awareness around these things, right, and you set yourself up like with the house, right, you board your windows up and you get ready for the hurricane. In most cases, the hurricane, which could be synonymous with psychedelics in this sense, are going to be a little gentler with you, because they're like, hey, even if we got to teach you some stuff right now, we know that you went into this intentionally. We know that you did your prep work. We know that you're not messing around with us for no reason and have no idea what could potentially happen. And so even if there's a challenging experience, it's going to be easier to go through. Now, you could say it's because you had that awareness of this might happen, or you could say more qualitatively and more spiritually that the plant medicine is actually okay, you're actually serious about this, and we're going to make sure that we don't annihilate you with what we're teaching you, right? And so, yeah, man, I love everything we've talked about in this conversation, and this has been an absolutely incredible ride. And you know what I got to do, man? I got to ask you where people can find you, where they can get in touch with you, what things you're offering. Drop everything, bro.
Yeah, man. So people can find me at www.newintention.com, neuintention.com. I'm rebuilding it, so I'll have some of my more intimate services, right? Speaking, one-on-one coaching, that stuff available, whether it's speaking to masterminds, speaking on stages to groups, facilitating some experiences, live experiences, and then, of course, one-on-one coaching where I work a little bit more deeply and more intimately, either for those involved in plant medicine or none at all, and helping others awaken, heal, and transform in their own ways on their path of self-realization. And they can find me anywhere on any social platform at Nathan Kohlerman.
Beautiful, man. And going with the trend of how I like to end my podcast, I got one last question for you. And that question is this: if someone listening was just swayed by you to experience psychedelic medicines for the first time, what is the one piece of advice that Nathan Kohlerman would suggest to allow them to have the smoothest experience possible?
Don't forget to breathe.
Yes.
Don't forget to breathe.
Spoken as a true gangster.
Just take a breath.
Yes.
Take a breath and just let go.
One of the best quotes I've ever heard was, fear is excitement without the breath, right? And it's that's one of the things that was wow, yeah, I'll take nail in the head for 500, please. That makes a lot of sense. And guys, when I first heard of a story surrounding Nathan's plant medicine experiences through a mutual friend, I remember being enamored and quite honestly blown away. I was blown away not only at the tangible results he received from that session, but also from his bravery in facing the challenges that can present themselves in these medicine experiences. And ultimately, yearn to teach us valuable lessons about ourselves and how we can take our shadow and bring it into the light to reclaim our wholeness. Nathan is a true testament to what is possible in one's life when they choose to intentionally laugh at the metaphorical devils in our lives and watch them run away and turn to dust right before our very eyes. For anyone who listened to this episode and heard the call to dive in deeper with Nathan and the incredible work he does in the world, please do yourself, your family, your mission, and the world at large a favor by answering that call and putting the necessary willpower required of you into action to prove to yourself that not only are you worth having the best experience of life humanly possible, but that you are capable and committed to making that reality come true. Nathan is a constant reminder that although our challenges can seem impossible at times when we are in the heat of them, it is only by facing challenge that we get to ride the wave that is the hero's journey, conquer our minds, and find faith in the process of life as infinite spirit embodied in the human form once more. Nathan, I am so grateful for you sharing your time, wisdom, and your inner child with us today on the show. And until next time, my brother, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.